Alcohol kicked my butt. John Thomson from Pocono Mountain Recovery Center joins us to talk about protecting addiction versus protecting recovery, Anedonia, and how the recovery industry handled COVID. He talks about trauma and using the trauma egg personally and with clients. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery Podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery. Ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery Podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates.
On the podcast today, Kurt and I have the privilege and honor of talking with John Thomson. John is an addiction counselor at the Pocono Mountain Recovery Center. He works extensively with men who are dealing with both trauma and addiction. John believes that addressing trauma in addiction treatment is a pivotal and vital part of the journey. We'll talk more about this today as we explore his incredible journey. John, thanks for being on with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I know, John, that we've been kind of talking before the show of a lot of different topics and playing around a little bit and getting to know each other. And you've shared some pretty cool ideas, but it might be good for our listeners to just kind of start maybe back with some history of, how you ended up in the treatment world and in recovery and as a substance abuse counselor. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so kind of like ground zero. I was working at Aetna in Middletown, Connecticut, and I was working doing some computer work and printout work, which back at that time was very high tech, scanning printouts. And that was a job that was really going to be a difference maker in my life, because of the potential and the ceiling there. There's limitless potential. I had already drank my way out of college twice and didn't see my way back to going to college again. And then my alcoholism again threatened my dream again to be a functioning person. The ultimate dream for me really was to be a functioning alcoholic. But that wasn't a reasonable dream, total fantasy, because I wasn't very functioning. I got the alcoholic part right, but not the functioning part. So I went to the EAP at Aetna because they fired me, and I told them, "You can't fire me. I'm an alcoholic. I need help." And they said, "Well, we kind of already fired you." So, we can do the help part maybe. We're actually an EAP, and we're actually an insurance company, and we'll pay for you to go to treatment. I didn't really know that they meant I would pay with my own benefits that I already had. But they weren't going to cut me off that day from my benefits. They were going to allow me to stay on for a little while so I could get treatment. And then I was going to have to COBRA my benefits anyway, so which I did. But basically, I went to Stonehaven, which is in Portland, Connecticut, May 4th, 1992, and I've been sober ever since. And the thing was, losing that job was so crushing, and I just felt so lost at that point. And even before I lost the job, I was feeling suicidal. So I had this suicidal ideation and like kind of dark cloud kind of thing going, and I just couldn't seem to get past it. So when I went to treatment and they told me, like the suicidal thinking is just kind of part of being an alcoholic, that if you get sober, you probably won't think that way. And they were right, like at least for me. And so the thing that was like kind of the worst possible thing that could have happened to me, then losing the job, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. Like I needed that. I needed that little push. And going to treatment, I did a first step packet in treatment, and it changed my life. To be able to see it in black and white on paper. And the question was, how has alcohol and addiction affected your life, and be specific, and especially like talk about relationships and other like opportunity cost, that type of thing. So I figured, I'm going to write this in about 5 minutes, and it's going to be very easy, maybe a paragraph. And started writing, and I kept writing, and I kept writing, and I kept writing. Before I know it, I've got 5 pages of consequences, and I'm 24 years old at the time. And, in my mind, even though I know I've got a problem, my problem really wasn't that bad. But I was able to dismiss some really important things and the patterns that had become really my life, of like continuing to self-medicate and looking for alcohol to solve all my problems, at least temporarily, which, there was a time where that worked kind of. And then there was a time like where it just stopped working. It wasn't really like helping in any way. It was really just causing more and more problems. So that's kind of the short version of the background. I can actually shorten it a little bit more, is that alcohol kicked my butt, and I'm cleaning that up a little. But that's it. Alcohol just kicked my butt continuously, constantly. And until I was able to really accept that, I wasn't able to get the benefits of treatment or recovery. I actually was talking to my dad last night, and he was reminding me of a emergency room visit where they had put me in 4-point restraints because of alcohol poisoning. They didn't know really what else I might have taken, but they put me in 4-point restraints for my safety and everybody else's safety. At the time I was like, yeah, that probably wasn't necessary. But now, looking back at it, it probably was necessary. The kind of effect that being put in 4-point restraints, like the day after, it's one of the things that you don't want to remember until you start wanting to remember. When you start wanting to know about the consequences and know like how bad things really were, to really get that deeper level of acceptance and honesty, and then you really kind of explore everything that's under the surface of the water on the iceberg. And I don't want to forget how it felt, feeling like a vampire, having the sunlight hit me that day, feeling like I'm gonna melt or explode, and knowing that the reason I feel like that is because of alcohol, but I want more than anything else at that moment to have more alcohol, which is kind of a big part of the insanity of what keeps addiction alive, is that massive rationalization and minimization. I like the term massive minimalization, which really, that brings to focus the idea of what we're capable of. Every time that I drank after that, I was able to forget that I was in 4-point restraints. I was able to forget how I felt the next day. And that isn't the only time I was in 4-point restraints. So, only twice, but still 2 times more than I really would like to have had. But now it's part of my story.
Well, and John, it's pretty incredible the way you talk about that, in the sense of it's so easy. And then I don't think this is just exclusive to addiction either, is that denial of reality is is a kind of a safety mechanism and a protective mechanism for us. And that's kind of what you're talking about is, as long as you're going to engage in a behavior, you've got to find all the good parts about it and ignore all the bad parts. Otherwise, you'd stop doing it, right? But it feels like it's a matter of life and death to continue when you're heavy, when addiction has a hold on you.
Absolutely. So addictions, it's not just like a choice, because there is choice involved. It's not that there isn't choice. It's that most of the conscious decision making is fed by the unconscious decision making. So there's impulsive, compulsive, obsessive, and like all those things kind of combine in the mind to basically justify or rationalize why it's a good idea to pick up another drink or another drug, which, then is like a continuation of the addiction. Until you really make a break from there and get some clarity and some distance from it, it's hard to really break out of it. And that's why most people can't. Most people don't. There's a shift that has to happen for anybody to get and stay in recovery, and that's a shift from protecting your addiction to a shift to protecting your recovery. And every time I see that happen, the person generally really starts investing in their recovery and starts to see things differently, and in a way that they were never able to see it before. That's a beautiful thing. Every time that I see that, I can't help but smile. It really makes me feel like somebody's made a connection that is going to make a big difference in their life.
They start to turn that corner of the difference between just white knuckling it and getting through treatment and start to heal and have that healing process take place.
Absolutely. The time where you start investing, really investing in your recovery, and not just that you don't want the consequences anymore, because most people don't really want the consequences, but then investing in all the things that are really going to not just keep you from having the consequences, but they're going to make it so that recovery's a way of life then, that. So you get to the turning point and you turn instead of going straight.
Yeah.
You got to make the turn.
That's I love those. I love the points that you're making, because they're so profound, and the way you describe them from a clinical point of view, it just kind of gives a little bit different twist on it than what we sometimes hear. So I really like the way you explain that. I'm curious. It's one thing to do recovery, but it's another thing to end up coming from a technical computer type background. And then become an addiction counselor. Can you talk kind of about that journey and how you got to that point?
Okay, I don't think I wasn't very technical. It was just at the time being able to scan printouts was technology back in 1992, which is now that's low tech. It's but there was the potential for actually getting in the computer field. I actually my first college was Marist College, which is, they were pretty closely connected with IBM, but I wasn't a computer science major there. Ironically, my youngest brother actually is an IT guy, and he didn't go to school for IT, but you never know where you're going to end up. But basically, I was kind of as far as getting into the addiction field, I wanted to become a music therapist. And I found out that music therapists are kind of limited as to where they can work. And there was going to be a lot of education that I was going to need that I didn't have. And that the faster track would be, I had started working in the addiction field, doing recreation and security, overnight security and that type of thing. It seemed like a natural fit for getting through college, this time. So, it was, I just got used to working in the addiction field and started running some groups, and then I decided I'm gonna finish my degree and get a psychology degree. And so the easiest path through that was the path that I took through Thomas Edison State University, and that actually was the quickest way to become a counselor. So I started becoming a counselor, and so most of it was really not so much the book learning, but the just the personal experience and being able to relate to people that are going through early recovery. I also worked in adolescent treatment at the time, and I was fortunate enough to work at a place that we did a lot of things with the kids there, and I was actually young enough to be able to kind of keep up with their energy, which now not so much. But we would take them for hikes, we would take them skiing, we'd take them to the shore, we would take them camping. We did all kinds of things with them, and I even got paid to take people to conferences and things like that, and other sober events, and kind of get them exposed to the world of recovery. So that was really a beautiful thing, and I was very lucky to work there when I did, because the company has since changed hands, and they don't do the same kind of work now. And so I've seen almost every place that I've worked at has become a different place. And that's nice to be able to still be in a place that does that type of work now.
Kind of fun. It's kind of fun to hear the way that people, that people's journey takes them, because not everybody that does recovery ends up working in the recovery industry, but certainly an awful lot of the people working in the recovery industry have their own recovery story.
Absolutely. Even billing and marketing.
Yes.
Oftentimes, you think that that's not really a field that, recovery wise. But, we do see a lot of people that are in recovery that, get involved in, not kind of the front end, but get involved in some kind of way, in the recovery, all the recovery resources.
And it's hard to, it's a unique industry, right? I've worked in a lot of businesses over time, and I have yet to come across an industry that is so supportive, because that's what recovery teaches us is how to be mindful and how to be empathetic, and how to take care of ourselves and do self-care. And there's an awful lot of hugging and connection that goes on in the industry, whereas you don't see that in a lot of other types of work that outside of the substance abuse and mental health industry. So it's unique in a lot of ways, but it's also super healing and helps people stay in recovery on one level or another. Which brings me to a question for you, John. What does you've been in recovery for a long time. What do you do now to maintain your recovery and keep yourself in a good place?
Well, self-care for counselors is probably one of the biggest blind spots. So, self-care for me means, trying to just have a life outside of work and to get the most out of that life. And, I am involved in some other kind of recovery related type of stuff. And to, the bottom line with that is if you want to remember that the problems that you've had, you don't want to forget those, and you want to be able to still live your life and appreciate the life that you have gratitude for the freedom that you have. And if you're practicing the things that help you to maintain that gratitude, then it's almost a foregone conclusion that you're going to be doing that. So one mistake that a lot of counselors do is they think that their work will keep them sober, and they usually quickly find out that not only does it not keep you sober, but it can be very stressful and be the need for even more support. So almost like business meeting, you know, you don't want to, definitely don't want to rely on that any more than you would rely on any one thing. But it's good to be able to do work that is fulfilling and that actually you feel like is like kind of like a sole purpose. And if you're doing that, you're going to feel fulfilled. There's a thing called Anedonia, if you guys are familiar, it's human fulfillment, and that basically Anedonia, if you can appreciate having some fulfillment through the work that you do and other parts of your life, you want to look at any aspect of your life that is taking away from that fulfillment and minimize those things, not mentally, but like in your life, and really the things that serve you, let the things that serve you be kind of like the driving forces in your life, and the things that don't serve you, you want to reflect enough on those to be able to say, okay, how do I get less of these?
Very good advice, and I love that you've shared kind of the way that you do it and what works for you. This is a topic that I haven't spent a lot of time on because it gets talked about a lot, and I don't necessarily. I mean, it's a topic that you hear in the news every day, and it's something we've been dealing with for the last year plus, which is COVID. And so I intentionally stay away from that a little bit. But I'm just curious what you have seen affect you personally with COVID, and some of the restrictions and social distancing that happened there. How did that affect you personally, and how did you see that affect people in treatment?
Okay, so the COVID thing has been both the worst thing that could happen to the recovery community and the best thing that could happen to the recovery community. We've seen a lot of people relapse that had some stability in their recovery, and it really brings forth the idea of the concept of meeting makers make it. But then what happens if you don't have meetings? Because if that, more again, the whole thing about putting all your eggs in one basket, if you only have like a singular focus, that really like takes away from if that singular focus gets taken away. So a lot of people that were meeting makers that really relied on that to keep them sober, that wasn't there anymore. That personal contact, that being able to like have some coffee talk and like being able to like see people before a meeting and after a meeting, unless you already had a really strong support system, your sobriety may not have survived COVID. And especially for people that were new to recovery, leaving treatment and being told, hey, just do a Zoom meeting. That'll keep you sober. Not to say that it's impossible, but just the continuation of that, very few people made it through that. And so unless your recovery was already really strong, you ended up back in treatment or worse. So this has been a rough situation. I'm in Northeast Pennsylvania, so we're not that far away from Manhattan and New York City, and we actually in the Poconos have a lot of people come from the city and spend their time here, and it's just been a rough time, not just professionally but personally as well. My family got COVID, and it was the last thing that I wanted to see happen. But working in the field that we work in, the decisions were kind of made that the work that we do is too important to not continue. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. A lot of seen a lot of people get COVID and that have that negatively affect their recovery, and because then you get like kind of like a perfect storm of now you have to isolate, like that's where addiction lives, in that isolation. And social distancing, just the social distancing alone, just doing the things that people needed to do to protect themselves from COVID was the opposite of the things that you need to do to protect yourself from addiction. So, it's like people are being told one thing, and then on the other hand, we don't want anybody to get COVID. We also don't want them to not connect in the way that is going to help them stay sober. So, that was a whole new level of balancing and being able to kind of express that and being able to like help people to try to figure those things out. So yeah, COVID's been the worst thing that's happened to the recovery community. It's also, in a way, like really promoted a lot of the Zoom meetings, and like nobody has an excuse to not go to the meeting now, because literally 24/7 there's a meeting. Like it's not face to face or in person, so it's not meant to be like that level of benefit. But people, it is still a benefit, and you can still. There's no reason why you can't, unless maybe you don't have the technology to do it. So yeah, it's been really interesting. It's definitely like forced me to shift my perspective a bit and to try to look at things a little differently and say, like that, you never know what's going to happen. That's another theme of recovery is you want to have a contingency plan. You want to make sure that, like if your relapse prevention plan includes that X factor, what if something you didn't expect happens? Because I certainly didn't expect COVID. When my wife started talking about it back in January of 2020, I was like, I don't think it's going to be such a big deal. I don't think it's really going to make it here. I think we'll be able to figure it out. And turns out, being in the northeast Pennsylvania, we were like one of the hardest hit areas, one of the earliest and hardest hit areas. And, numbers are kind of starting to creep back up here. And, it generates a lot of anxiety and people that, maybe we're doing okay. Like now they see the numbers going back up and they're like, oh, I'm so full of anxiety and fear now. I need something for that. So that's something to just kind of be aware of and like think, okay, how do we mitigate that as well?
Well, and it's... Go ahead, Kurt.
Did Pocono close last year, and is that a concern moving forward of how to protect the facility and the clients from those types of issues again in a resurgence?
We did not close. What we did do, we stopped taking people from outside of the state. So we were limited as to who would be able to come for treatment. And we also did testing so that anybody that came into treatment was tested. And there was a time where that also wasn't even available. Testing, nobody could be tested. And so basically, unless somebody really had symptoms, and had to be brought to a hospital setting to get tested, that wasn't even a reality to be able to be tested. So, it's nice that we have that, and we're all vaccinated now at work. So, that's definitely a plus. We feel a lot safer that way, but, we never closed and we were never able to justify closing because the work that we're doing is so important. And there's definitely some risk involved in doing that. And, I ended up getting it myself, and a lot of my coworkers got it. Some of the community members in treatment got it too. And so, it really is a thing where, we learned a lot from that experience. But now we've got actually a little bit more protection and some things that are in place that are keeping it so that it's actually, we're not as worried about it as we were before. because a lot more people are vaccinated.
It's been quite a challenge for the industry, for everybody in a whole, and yeah, you hear it happening across across the ocean, across the world, and think, well, it's probably not going to make it here, but it seems to have made it just about everywhere. And in my lifetime, certainly, and I think most of our lifetimes, many of us have never experienced a pandemic like this, but it's not the first time that our world has experienced it. But it was very, very different than back in the 1800s and early 1900s when some of those plagues came through. It's interesting to compare, but I appreciate you sharing some of your perspective and experience around that. It's I think we're still being challenged, and like you said, it still creates some anxiety and some challenges for people as we look at how it's how the world of COVID is changing, and how we have to still think about it. So I appreciate you addressing that. I know that not too long ago, pretty recently, you had an article written about you in the Suburban Life magazine, and I'm wondering if you would like to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I was approached to offer up some experience about trauma work, which I've been pretty extensively trained in doing trauma work. I actually trained with Judy Crane down at the first we were actually at the refuge, and then we were actually at her house. So she does a thing called Spirit to Spirit, and that's where she does the trainings for the trauma work. And it's based really upon a lot of like creative artwork, expression, and to be able to kind of identify trauma, make connections, and be able to process some of that through the work that she does. So the mainstay in that is really the trauma egg, and the trauma egg is actually a very interesting piece. And so the idea is that you make an egg shape and you just fill it up with trauma and addiction. Everything is connected to your addiction. Everything is connected to your trauma. You make little pictures inside the egg in different cells in the egg, and if you've done something to prepare for that, like for example, a timeline or even like a rough draft of the egg, if you know your story, you'll be able to really identify a lot of things in that egg. And then not only identify that stuff, but you'll start making connections that you've never made before, which I actually experienced because she had us all doing the training. We all had to do our own egg, like do our own work. So that was an amazing experience to be able to like do that with her. So I spent 5 weeks down in Ocala, Florida with Judy, between the refuge, her home, and she opened up a new place called the Guest House. And in the time that we were actually doing the training, she purchased the Guest House. She didn't purchase it before we got to see it. She brought us there, and we actually did some trauma work at the place before she even owned it, and before she even decided that this is going to be the place. So that was really interesting to see the beginning of something so far, like at the beginning, and to see and do some work there too. So that trauma egg, without a doubt, every time that I see somebody do that, they really pull a lot out of that. They get a takeaway from that is usually insight that they were not able to do. It's so almost cuts to it brings out the child, because it's like the pictures and everything, like the drawing and the creativity. It's hard not to connect, and especially if you have any childhood trauma, it's going to help you to understand all the things that you're going to need to understand to heal from that. By the end of all that, with the support and with a little bit of kind of clinical skill, but it's mostly just the egg itself, just doing the experience is just, I have not seen anybody benefit. Even I was skeptical myself the first time, she's telling me, hey, do this trauma egg, you're going to make connections you didn't make before. And, I'd been sober for a while before I did it. So, I had done some work. And come to find out, she was right. I actually made connections, pretty significant connections that I didn't make before. So, I haven't seen anybody not make connections through it, if they even like try a little bit. But I have seen a lot of people really benefit from that. So also, just understanding trauma. Trauma work is such an impactful part of treatment and such an impactful part of recovery. And addiction is so connected to trauma so often. It isn't that we didn't understand that there was a connection between trauma and addiction, because that has always gone without saying. But now we understand it even more. We understand so much more about trauma and healing from trauma and the necessary things that need to happen. The need for safety, especially feeling safe in our own bodies, being able to talk in a group and being able to like connect with other people, relate with other people, and see that like your experience probably wasn't that. Not that it wasn't unique to you, but that other people probably had, at least on some level, a similar experience. So you're really not that alone. And trauma is like one of those things that when people internalize it, there's this feeling of like, I'm different, that I'm somehow not like other people. And so like to help people through that and to get them to be able to see, there's lots of stories of other people. And your story is, well, it's a unique story and it's unique to you, but there's some parts of your story that every part of your story, there's going to be other people that have had similar experience. And that's like that human connection, and humility comes to say, like the benefit of humility, and humility is like one of those things that is very easily misunderstood and has a bad name. Like most people don't really want to be humbled or to have humility, but to stay sober, you need a certain amount of humility to be able to say, like, okay, I can't control this. Like the things that I once thought were going to be helpful or self-soothing or help me to forget and be numb actually contribute to more trauma. That's another thing that I really noticed a lot of. And so like what I do with the trauma egg is I make sure I tell people that this is an addiction egg. So I don't even call it a trauma egg. I call it an addiction egg, because what I've seen a lot of people do is they'll put all their trauma on there except for their addiction, and they'll just have like this blank spot of the addiction, which it's not that they haven't identified it or been able to say, this is all the stuff that has happened, consequences of my addiction. They just don't consider it to be trauma. They consider it to be something separate. But it's usually always very well connected to whatever happened to them in the past that has like caused them to want to self-medicate, or and also it's important for people to also know that because of the progressive nature of addiction, when addiction usually takes hold, it's actually pretty effective for helping people to be numb, for helping the people to forget. And for some people, if trauma is severe enough, addiction actually even starts out as like survival. To be able to survive like feelings of like wanting to kill yourself or suicidal ideation, and like if there's a chemical that can help you to forget about that, why wouldn't you want to take it? It totally makes sense. But then the thing that you're self-medicating with usually ends up, because of the progressive nature of addiction, being the problem and then causing more trauma. So I want to make sure anybody that does anything like that they make sure they make the connections between overdoses, car accidents, to no hospitalizations. That's all part of trauma. The disruption in relationships, financial issues, all those things, like that trauma contributes to those things, and the dysregulation that comes along with trying to regulate it and manage unmanageabilities.
I love the way you utilize that trauma egg, I'm imagining that doing your own trauma egg, you were that may have been where you identified those 4-point restraints as maybe being some traumas. Can you give us an example of one of the things that came to fruition for you as you did that work?
Well, the 4-point restraints for sure for one of those. And I really knew a lot about my alcoholic story already. I knew a lot about all those consequences. I did not make the connections to childhood experience until I actually was able to see it in the egg. So like a lot of my addictive thinking, and in particular the need for escape, or the things that alcohol did for me, like came from childhood experience. So that I was never able to see that connection so clearly until I did that work. And so it's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a good explanation. It's just like the first step is like a really good explanation for anybody if addiction or alcoholism is a problem, and you don't understand the first step. If you're denying that it's a problem, which is really the opposite of step one, the admission versus the denial of it. If you don't see it and you really aren't in line with that, then you can't possibly overcome it, because you're going to continue to look at that as a solution, as opposed to being the problem or the poison. You look at the poison as the medicine instead of the medicine as the poison for what it really is.
Yeah, I love the way you kind of make those correlations. John, you've got just a tremendous story that you've shared with us, and you've shared with us some tools and some of the approaches that you use in treatment, and as you do work with people, and it's been super powerful. I appreciate you sharing all of those pieces with us. I imagine that people are going to want to get a hold of you and pick your brain some more and learn from you and your experience. What's the best way for them to do that?
That's a good question. I guess probably the easiest way to contact me would be through email, through my work email. So it would be John, John.Thomson, Thomson, at Pocono, Pocono, MRC, Mountain Recovery Center.com. So John.Thomson at PoconoMRC.com.
Excellent. It's been fantastic having you on the podcast today and learning from you. I know you've got a wealth of information, and we could talk for hours and hours. So we may have to have you back on again to get an update of what's going on, after
Absolutely.
COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I love to talk about recovery. It's really a passion. And, before I started doing the trauma work, I didn't understand what a passion that could be as well. So like music's a passion, trauma work is a passion. I didn't even go into any of the musical stuff, but that definitely, there's a connection that you can make with music that there just isn't something else that actually kind of is so easy to make the connection as much as music is. So that's another thing that I really love, and there's a lot of musicians and talented people, creative people in recovery that they've just been using their creativity in ways that really hasn't been working for them. But then they get sober and they can really kind of channel that creativity in a way that not only does it serve them, but it serves the whole recovery community. So that's kind of a beautiful thing that is like the byproduct, one of those byproducts of the recovery and recovery community.
Yeah.
I don't know much about that one, and that would be fun to have you back on to talk about more, because I know a lot of times you hear about creative people really using addiction to kind of support their creativity, and it would be interesting to hear a lot of those points and the things you're saying about how ultimately it could be that it's the opposite, right?
Absolutely. Time and time again, people will say, like the drug makes me more creative. And again, it's that progressive nature of addiction is that probably at one time it actually did that. But addiction has progressed, it actually tends to block you more than it frees you. And not only creatively, but like in all other ways as well. So that's one of those things, like if you can kind of really focus that in a little bit and kind of accentuate that, like one of the things that I've felt in my own personal recovery is getting in a creative flow was a better high than any other high that I ever experienced. And so like these natural highs are like, not only is there no consequences to them, but they're reproducible in a lot of ways, and they support recovery efforts. But they also really give you that, we were talking about eudaimonia earlier, and like that human fulfillment. You feel like you really kind of fulfilled a potential, like when you are able to create something out of nothing, and just like something in your mind becomes a reality.
And I like the way you talk about that as sustainable too. It's sustainable, whereas addiction is not sustainable. Which is, I love the way you kind of correlate those two and help take the shame away from addiction. So appreciate the work you do, John, and certainly appreciate you being on with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, no
Thanks,
shame in recovery at all, ever.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic, isn't it?